Hi, folks. I'm happy to welcome you to our second annual Peace of Mind Conference, sponsored by Panhandle Behavioral Health Alliance. I'm Dave Clark. I'm the chairman of the Behavioral Health Alliance this year, and again, welcome. Well, the purpose of the Health Alliance, if you don't know, is to improve how our region promotes mental health well-being in just everyday life. And that means helping people get mental health and behavioral health when they need it and how they get it. So in addition to today's session, we certainly hope you will plan to come back tomorrow at 11 o'clock. We'll continue this conference with some great presentations and also a virtual resource fair that I think you'll find very interesting. And these will be from different organizations across our region that will help you look at their resources and how to obtain them. So let me thank our sponsors. Two big sponsors we need to say thank you to, and that's the Amarillo Area Foundation, and that's Excel Energy Foundation. But we've had help from a lot of other people, and let me name those for you. First, a big thank you to Panhandle PBS, the United Way of Amarillo and Canyon, West Texas AHEC, which is the Amarillo Health Education Centers, and they're providing the CEUs for us, Amarillo College, and First Presbyterian Church. So a big thank you for all these people making the Peace of Mind Conference happen this year. Well, first, let's get kind of into some information about Zoom. If you need any trouble shooting or getting tips on how to Zoom or connecting with our conference, you're having any kind of problem at all, go to the reminder email that we sent out, and that should help you immediately. But if not, go to the bottom of your screen to chat and put in the information you're requiring or the problems you're having, and we'll try to fix those right here at our center. So next, and this is very important, you need to know that this session and tomorrow's web session will be recorded. Now, if you requested CEUs, you must watch all of today's sessions, which is going to be great, and at least half of tomorrow's, but I think you'll want to watch both full days. Well, we want to kind of get an idea of who's watching us today. And so we've got a poll that we'd like you to answer this question. So you can go through each of the blocks, and if it applies to, every one of them applies to you or only one, check that box. It'll give us a good idea of actually who is our audience today. So are you a provider? Are you someone who's lived with experience of mental health? Are you a community member? And so check those right quick, and it'll give us kind of an idea of who we're talking to today, if you'll do that. So we're going to give you about 30 more seconds to do that. So quickly, if you can, fill out one of those boxes or all of them, whichever applies to you, and we would appreciate that. It'll really help us get an idea of our audience. Okay. We're going to kick this off so we have maximum time with our speakers. And I want to introduce Joe Street. I know we're all interested to hear from friends at Street Toyota. And I think if anybody's bought a Toyota or a Volkswagen, everybody knows Joe Street, Toyota, Volkswagen. But what you may not know about Joe is the man that sells the cars. So let me kind of give you an idea of him. First, Joe is a great civic worker and does so much for our community, privately and through his organization. Second thing is that he's a great supporter in his faith. So I just wanted to make note of those two things. But if you had to really summarize all about Joe Street, in 2013, Joe was selected as the Man of the Year. So if you can imagine all the requirements it takes to be the Man of the Year for Amarillo, Texas, that's Joe Street. So he's a phenomenal man, and we just want to recognize all that he's done. Now I'm going to introduce a little bit more about Joe, but he's going to introduce Danny Mize. And Danny is going to be the one that really brings the support to his program spiritually, emotionally, and mentally. And so Danny will be a real key in this presentation. So if you have a question to Joe or Danny, go down to the bottom of your screen under questions and answers and put your question in, and either Joe or Danny will be glad to answer those questions for you. So let me kind of give you a quick summary of what Joe says. Joe says his guiding business philosophy is this: You cannot have happy customers unless you have happy associates. Take good care of both. And with that, Joe, take off.
Well, thank you, Dave. I look forward to this opportunity of introducing Danny and telling you a little bit about what Street Auto Group does. First of all, let me tell you about Danny. Danny and his wife settled in Amarillo 14 years ago. In addition to his work with our two dealerships, Danny continues his part-time ministry with Fellowship of Believers Church in Hereford. Prior to moving to Amarillo, Danny was co-founder for 10 years, the executive director for the Family Grief Support Center in Edmond, Oklahoma, called Kids Place, which was founded after the Oklahoma City bombing in 1995. Here in Amarillo, Danny serves as a volunteer with a similar family grief support center, the Hope and Healing Place. Drawing on his background as a hospital and hospice chaplain, church minister, and grief support, Danny now serves the Street Auto Group as our corporate chaplain, a role our company just calls staff support. For the past 4 years since his retirement from full-time work, Danny has made himself available to support our employees of the two dealerships through in-person visits, calls, texts, and emails. Our purpose today is to explain how our staff support element that is integral to the part of Street Auto Group for our employees at Street Toyota and Street Volkswagen. So during the summer of 2016, 4 years ago, we hired Danny to be available to all our employees for the two dealerships in a supportive role. He'll explain how the details of how this works, but I want to mention to you our reasonings behind this service. Employees know that their team members can't always or easily leave the challenges and stresses of their personal lives at the door of the workplace each day. Sometimes the challenges of life, including personal relationships, addictive or self-destructive behaviors, personal family illnesses, and grief, are so overwhelming that a job performance is negatively affected, and/or relationship with coworkers are stretched to a breaking point. At other times, stresses in the workplace may cause an employee to be miserable and angry at coworkers or even company management. In addition to that, illnesses, injuries, family hospitalizations, the birth of a baby, or family deaths can throw an employee for a loop. We know that, distracting them from their work and breaking their focus and effectiveness. Some of these folks will end up quitting their jobs or experience such a decline in their performance that we'd have to let them go. And neither of these solutions is desirable for us or the company, for the employee or the company. Some employees enjoy a great support system. We know this at home through caring listeners, through their family, their church, or maybe a circle of non-work friends. But there's many others that seem to live their lives in relative isolation with no one to talk to vent with, or turn to for validation and support when they need it. It's especially for this latter group that we provide all our workers with a staff support person, Danny Mize. Danny makes himself available to our folks on a non-judgmental, confidential listener and support person, which results in better adjusted and satisfied employees. Now I'm just going to turn it over to Danny and let you hear from him.
Okay, thank you, Joe. Thank you, Dave, and Sri and Charlotte. You all have organized a great gathering, and I appreciate everyone connecting with us online and your interest in all of this. I do want to tell you more about my role with the Street Auto Group employees, and it really is a privilege to be able to do that. But I'm going to do that by telling you what I am and what I'm not to those employees, and then a little bit more. My company business card says staff support. And another way to understand that is corporate chaplain, but not everybody has a positive reaction to the idea of chaplain, or they don't understand what a chaplain does. So at the street companies, we call it staff support. And when I meet a new employee, here's basically an overview of what I tell him or her. And often there are other employees standing around. They get to hear it again. But to the new employees, let me just give you my spiel to them. I tell them, Hi, I'm Danny Mize, the staff support person at the Street Auto Group, Toyota and Volkswagen. And all of my life, I've been a people person, a hospital chaplain, a hospice chaplain, a grief support facilitator, and I've been involved in church ministries. And Mr. Street values his employees so much that in my semi-retirement years, he has made me available to you for your support. Now, I'm not a licensed counselor or a fixer. I don't have a magic wand that I can wave and fix everything. And I'm not a spy. I keep our conversations confidential. But here's what I am. I am an interested listener and a compassionate responder. I make referrals when additional help is needed. I can meet with you here at the dealership, in the conference room, or out walking around the parking lot, or at an off-site location like the coffee shop or a donut shop. I do make hospital visits, that is when conditions allow me to get in. And I offer grief support. I carry 2 different book titles in the trunk of my car, purchased by the street companies that I can give to people who are grieving the loss of a loved one. And I will not interfere with your work, I tell them. I won't embarrass anybody, especially by follow-up conversations. I won't come around, for instance, in a future visit and say something in front of your coworkers like, well, are you doing better with that these days? I don't do that. I let them come to me about the follow-up. And I give them my card and I tell them that they can call, text, or email me 24/7. I carry a separate phone just for the street company employees, and I leave it on all the time. And then I conclude by saying, don't hesitate to let me know how I can be of support to you. So that's what I tell the employees. Now let me tell you a little bit more of the details. And we do all of this today with the hopes that some of you are connected with companies where you can offer them support and help. And we'll even talk before we finish today of some ideas of how companies can better support their employees. But in essence, at the street companies, I allow the employees to make the decisions regarding the interaction they want or need from me. I don't force myself on anyone. But as I walk through the dealerships, I am evidence that their employer cares about them in non-judgmental and tangible ways. And I've had several employees say, boy, my previous companies never did anything like this. But I give them someone to talk to, a sounding board. And if they're uncomfortable visiting with a supervisor or a member of management, they know they can always come to me. Now, we have a vision statement and a mission statement about what we do in this, and here they are. The vision is to encourage employees with listening ears, a compassionate heart, and helpful hands. The mission is connecting with employees where they work, providing as much encouragement and support as they want or need, becoming an extension of their employer's care, representation at hospitals and funerals when desired, equipping employees with helpful life crisis skills, and supporting employees in crisis so they can return to their responsibilities when they are ready. And in his introduction, Joe mentioned several things that employees often carry in their life that can affect their relationships at work and their work focus. Let me share my list. Marriage challenges, financial difficulties, the birth or adoption of a baby, parenting issues, job stress, conflict on the job, depression, chemical dependency, grief and loss, hospitalization and rehab, caregiving for a family member, and this could go on. And as a corporate chaplain or staff support person, I am available to them in a spiritual sense as well as a physical sense, but I don't emphasize spirituality unless there is a request by the employee or the family member. Now, I do have to say they know about my church ministry background and they can pursue that if they wish, and many do. I remain open and available to all employees regardless of religious or non-religious orientation. However, I do personally pray for the company and the employees regularly. and I pray with and for individuals upon request. It's not unusual for someone at one of the street companies to say, would you pray about that? Or they may say, can we step over here and you pray for me right now? So there is that element. Let me say a little more about the mechanics of what I do for the workers. In order to build relationships and be visible to the employees so that they know they can talk when they need to, I make weekly visits, at least weekly, to both dealerships. I attempt to see and greet everyone who is working at that time, from those who clean the building to Joe Street if he's in his office. And those casual strolls through all departments and all offices usually lead to informal conversations and often follow up to previous contacts. Sometimes an employee will have something they need to talk about that requires more time, and so we may make an appointment to meet off-site. Or if their time permits, we'll find a quiet place, indoors or out, to visit right then. And on more than one occasion, I've been called on by a supervisor to sit with employees in what I would call conflict mediation role. And these are situations where the failure of the employees to work things out and work together in more harmony could have resulted in job termination for one or both individuals. But by sitting down and talking to each other with me as a go-between, it's allowed them to continue to be employed by the company and to be productive workers. I've also served as a liaison between employees and company managers. And at their request or response to my offer, I'll go with them. I had an employee who had a question for Joe Street, and I said, let's go to his office. I checked with him. He said, come on in. So that's another role that I serve. Now, Joe mentioned I've been doing this for 4 years. Let me offer some observations about these first 4 years. I keep a chart of the 20 or so hours that I average each month. And I break it down by showing the hours I spend in relationship building conversations. That's what some people call making rounds, just chatting with people, getting to know them. So there's the relationship building conversations as compared to the supportive conversations, the meetings to listen and help people deal with issues. And what I observed by looking at that chart is by the 3rd month on the job, the percentage of my time spent in supportive conversations with employees was approaching that of the relationship building visits. And by the end of the first year, my supportive hours per month exceeded the hours I was spending in just building relationships. And that trend has continued through the years, although sometimes it's higher, sometimes lower. There have been a couple of months where the support hours that I put in have doubled those of relationship building. What I'm trying to say is people have needs and they need to talk. And having someone like a staff support person available to them opens them up. Now, here's some illustrations of how people's lives have been affected by this offer of support. I will, of course, keep identities hidden and confidential, but here are several. After months of friendly greetings and no real interaction with one employee, while we were looking under the hood of a vehicle together, this technician asked, without making eye contact with me, still looking at the engine of the car, he said, "Do you and your wife ever argue and fight?" Totally surprised me because he hadn't really said anything for all those months. But he finally was ready to talk about his somewhat turbulent relationship with his girlfriend. And that just opened the door for a long relationship of support. Another worker proudly tells people, "Danny even came to the hospital to visit my mother-in-law when she was sick." I don't know if he thought that nobody else would or could, but he still tells people about that. Another stopped me one day to talk about relationship challenges and told me, "I've not told anyone else about this part of what I'm talking about, not even my fiance." See, she obviously felt comfortable enough to open up to me about her struggles. And that was a case where I recommended a licensed counselor for follow-up visits. She needed more than just my occasional listening ear. Now, there was another employee who was a native of another country even, so he didn't have many family or friends locally. And he asked to visit with me over lunch in the company conference room weekly. When one of the managers heard about that, not knowing who the employee was, he said, "Weekly lunch with an employee?" And I said, "Hey, if that's what he wants, that's what we're going to do." We each brought our own sack lunch, and that practice continued for 5 or 6 weeks. This guy really needed somebody to talk to. And then months after he had moved on to work for another company, he contacted meeting for Saturday because he needed a little more time to process his life and the choices which were ahead of him. And I willingly did that. Now I want to tell you about one situation in more detail, and I will say that I did ask permission of this employee to share these details, not a name, but just more of his story. In fact, when I asked him about this and told him what I wanted to say, he said, "You can say anything about me as long as it's the truth." So here's what I want to tell you about this one. Soon after I started working with the street companies, I learned that an employee's mother was critically ill. So I made hospital visits. And at first, those were mostly with the employee as he sat at her bedside, since she was not very alert due to her illness and medication. But then after her recovery, the employee and I continued to talk about her, his life, and he opened up to me and told me how his past had made other companies reluctant to hire him. But the Street Auto Group took a chance and they gave him a job. And when his brother later was injured critically, I made hospital visits. And then I've continued to ask for updates about his brother's progress. And most recently, or more recently, his mother's health declined once again, and then she died. So I called and texted the employee and offered my support, and then I've engaged in supportive conversations since he's been back at work. So what I want to say there is during the 4 years, we've built a relationship that allows us to be caring and allows me to be caring and supportive. It's an open communication relationship. And I believe that has helped that team member maintain his employment through some very challenging life situations when otherwise he might have just said, you know, I've got too much going on, I need to walk away. But he's kept a job that other companies weren't even willing to give him the chance to have in the first place. He knows he's accepted and supported at work. And in fact, just in the last couple of weeks, he sent me a text message in reply to me inquiring about his brother. He said, I quote, "Thank you for everything you do for whoever you can. I am more than blessed to have you in my life. Thank you." So what we're doing at the Street Auto Group is making a difference in people's lives. But I want to say that corporate wellness involves more than my visits and my availability. It starts there, but there's more to it. In addition to my making weekly visits so that I can connect with people at the dealerships. And by the way, I break those up to different days, different times of the day so that I catch people who work different schedules. But I also try to be a part of the fabric of the companies, as I would call it. I attend luncheons and award ceremonies whenever possible so that I can offer encouragement and affirmation to the employees. I serve as a member of the new employee orientation team. I lead some of the activities and feedback during the half-day events at both Toyota and Volkswagen. I write an upbeat, encouraging, life skills-oriented piece for both dealerships' newsletters each month. And I've volunteered with charitable organizations which the street companies promote and support. And I try to schedule my blood donations so that I can give on the day that there's an on-site blood drive at the dealership. I want people to see me as part of the family. I want to be seen and known as part of the team. But beyond my involvement with all the employees at all levels, corporate wellness also has to be promoted by observant managers who encourage employees to visit with me, the staff support person. And that happens often. An employee will say, you know, my manager said, I ought to talk to you. And then an employee assistance fund is available to team members at the dealerships. if they need financial assistance. And there's a small group of key employees serving to assess the needs and facilitate the distribution of funds. And that helps people get through some really tough times. And we know that financial stress can drag us down and make us ineffective at home and at work. Managers, including the human resources director, encourage employees to seek the support and assistance of professional counseling when they need it, 12-step or related programs, and the support of a team member's faith community if that's available. So that's a better picture, a bigger picture of what we do at the Street Auto Group companies. But I want to address a broader question. What do we look for, or what would you look for if you were looking to add a corporate chaplain or an employee support person to an existing business? What kind of person would you want? Well, here's my list. A compassionate, empathetic person who also understands and respects personal boundaries. Someone with experience in supporting people in crisis, grief, and life celebrations. One who exhibits good reflective listening skills, who listens more than they talk. Now today I'm talking more than I listen, but we'll get to question and answer later. A person who recognizes when it's time to make referrals to others in the community. One who can be supportive and a good listener without advancing a personal agenda, prejudice, religion, or a prescriptive plan to fix anyone. And a friendly person who's comfortable with making short relationship building visits in the workplace without interfering with the mission of the company. Someone who is comfortable with the long view of supportive relationships, who realizes that they may not be called upon until a significant life event happens or may never be utilized by some employees. They may have all of the support they need and they may never turn to me or a corporate chaplain or a staff support person. And finally, you want to look for one who will invest time and energy in the process of learning the corporate culture and quietly inserting themselves into company life whenever it's possible and appropriate. Now, I want to anticipate another question as well. How can companies be more supportive of their employees if they don't have a corporate staff support person, or if they're not large enough to afford to have someone like that? Here's some suggestions. Train managers to be observant of employees' needs and how to be compassionate listeners when engaged in conversation with team members. Not always be the boss, but be a compassionate listener as well. Companies can create an employee assistance fund like we have, that I've talked about. Encourage employees to make donations to it. And in our case, then the company matches those donations. And then a small group of trusted folks to listen to the needs and dispense and distribute those funds. Companies can work on developing a culture of support and openness and invite new and existing employees to contribute to and support and promote those goals. One of the important things we do in staff orientation is to explain the culture of the street companies and what it takes to be an active and contributing member of that culture in those companies. Develop a system for communicating about and responding to employees' needs, their physical, financial, emotional, and crisis situation needs. And then if an on-site visiting staff support person, like myself with the street companies, if that's not possible, if there's no way to have that available in your workplace, at least have a go-to person available, a plan, a person standing by who can assist the company and individual employees through crisis or difficult situations. Companies shouldn't wait till the edge of crisis and then say, what should we do? Who should we call? So these are my suggestions about how companies can be proactive in supporting the employees. So that's the essence of my presentation. If we can get Joe Street to come back online. we'll deal with some questions that have been submitted and others that you may be submitting. And I'm looking at one online right now. The question is, Danny, have you ever had a situation where one employee or manager has asked you to visit with another employee because of an issue? Was it considered intrusive, and how do you handle that? Yes, I will answer that live. It gives me a choice here. I don't do that. If someone says to me, hey, Jim or Sue or Sally needs you to call them, I explain to them patiently and lovingly that would be intrusive for me to insert my life into someone else's life without an invitation. So I encourage the managers, encourage employees, ask them to call me. Here's my card if they've lost it, if they don't have my information in the system. I do not make those intrusive kinds of situations. And then Joe, here's one for you.
Okay.
Why did you feel it was important for Danny to report to you and the managers instead of HR, the general manager?
You know, really, Danny doesn't report to me or any of management. All Danny does is really turn in the hours that he works for us. We want to make sure that everything that Danny does is confidential, and that you know, we want him to be, you know, in the role that he provides without any management interference. So Danny doesn't report to me or anyone else.
And I will elaborate on what Joe said. I turn in a quarterly report that says, here are the hours, and some of the kinds of, I may have a sentence or two that say, here are some of the kinds of things that we've dealt with, family issues or employment issues, but yeah, nothing that identifies who I'm talking to, what's going on. And I visited with Joe and the general managers and department managers just like everyone else. And that allows HR to be HR and do what they need to do and deal with insurance and other kinds of support, because the HR and office people need support, and I make visits to them just like I do everyone else.
I have a question that was submitted earlier that for me, it says, what advice would you give to other employers or business leaders on how to measure the success of a mental wellness program similar to what you have? You know, I thought about this. How do you measure the success? Because obviously you're making a financial decision here. And I thought about 4 different ways I think you could measure the success of the wellness program. Number one, kind of is the bottom line, what the productivity of the company is. It would be one measurement. Another one, and it depends on your company, would be customer satisfaction. When Dave was introducing me, we talked about we understand and we survey customers and so forth, that to have high customer satisfaction, you have to give employees a great workplace. They have to be very satisfied with you, or they're not going to be able to transfer that on to your customers. Another measurement to me about the success of the program would be turnover. You know, if you measure your turnover and people who leave, you do an exit survey, you find out, you know, was there a problem? Was it resolved? Or what were the reasons they were leaving? And then the last thing I came up with as measure of success would be, when we have a job opening, a lot of times it's filled because of another employee recommending a friend. And, you know, it's the old saying, good people, if you have good people, they know other good people. And lots of our people have come from recommendations from other employees. So that's kind of the things I came up to answer that question.
Joe, there's another one. An attendee has typed in asking me, how are you compensated for your work? Are you salaried? And yes, I am salaried. I receive a part-time salary that regardless of the number of hours, I mentioned maybe an average of 20-something hours. Sometimes it's more than 30. I don't punch a clock. In fact, the street company employees don't know when I'm coming. And as I said, I go at least once a week to both locations, sometimes more often. And then as their needs, I show up other times as well. And then someone has asked, Danny, how do you keep yourself healthy as you are hearing difficult situations on a consistent basis? What are your care tactics that keep you positive and to prevent burnout? And I'll answer that in several aspects. One, I try to keep myself physically healthy. In my semi-retirement years, I have quite a commitment to exercise and reading of things that are not connected to my church ministry or to my role as a staff support person. So just to relax and enjoy things on my own. I also have some close friends. My brother is one, and we talk on the phone every day. He is my mentor in church ministry and a good friend, best friend. And so I talk to him. I also have a close friend who has a background in Christian counseling. We used to play racquetball together till my joints started showing the signs of wear. So now we sit and visit over a meal. It's a lot less stressful, but visiting with people and my wife at home without betraying any confidences, I share, and that also helps me stay healthy. I also have a counselor friend that if I am in need of counseling, I know that I can go as not just as a friend, but as one who is seeking counseling and support. And I've done that in the past, and I recognize that that's important for everyone. So, go ahead, Joe.
To give Danny a break, I've got one again that came in before we started. It says, how do you get started in determining how to meet your employees' needs? I'll just tell you this, about 12 years ago, we decided really we wanted to be a really, really great employer, one of the best in Amarillo. So we went out and talked to what we perceived to be some of the best employers, people like VSA Hospital, Amarillo National Bank and others, and we talked to their leadership, see what they do and how they do it to make, to get Danny talked about our orientation, and Danny's always been a part of orientation since he came to work for us, but we started that a long time ago, and we spend half a day with our employees, let them hear from all the leadership of the dealership, let them, we give them the principles and so forth that we think are important for our company to let them hear. And that's been just, a really big part of what we do. But like I said, we wanted, Danny was just another thing that we could do for our employees besides all the, the nice parties or, picnics and things like that. And we do a lot of that. But, just adding on to what we could do for our employees to make this a much better place, to make it the best place you could work.
Mm-hmm. And employees respond to that. They know they're a part of something very special, especially, as I said, people reflect on the fact that in previous employments, they haven't had that kind of support. Someone asked another question, typed in, Danny, have you had occasions where HR issues would cause you to disclose private information, such as harassment, abuse, anything inappropriate? How do you handle that? Well, back to the orientation that Joe mentioned. In my little spiel to employees, I don't get into that. I just visit with them when I first see them on the job. But when they come through orientation, we cover a lot from the HR perspective about what is acceptable at work and not acceptable, and what behavior constitutes crossing the line. And when I introduce myself and tell more about what I do, I explain that I keep conversations confidential unless there are situations that are required where I'm required to break confidentiality. And that is if a person is a threat to themselves or made a threat to others, or if there's abuse involved, I am obligated to report that. But I wouldn't do that without letting the individual know, here's what we need to do. There have been situations where I've encouraged the employee to go to another employee and have a good conversation, and I've offered to be that mediator if need be. There have been situations where I've encouraged employees to go to their supervisor, make sure the supervisor knows what they are struggling with, but I don't go tell on them. I offer to go with them, but I maintain confidentiality except cases where it has to be reported.
I'll just say this too. We do use an outside HR company, and when a new employee comes to work for us, the first day they're going to go through the HR training. It's going to give them a number to call if they have any reports of harassment or verbal abuse or anything like that, if they don't feel comfortable just to go into management. But it instructs them very specifically what to do.
And Joe, here's one more for you. It's got both of our names on it, but I'll let you speak to it first. If you had to do everything over about the staff support thing, what would you do differently? You want to start with?
Well, first of all, I'll just say we're very fortunate in finding a person of Danny's qualifications, and he just personally has done such a great job. You can hear all the things that he does, and just the hospital visits, and just making himself available. And Danny's just such a non-confrontational person, and he meets and greets people so easily. And if you ask me to do anything differently, there's nothing I would do differently.
And from my perspective, the model that we are using is very comfortable for me. I know of other corporate support or corporate chaplains models that are different. I know of one where the staff person, the support person, attended 2 meetings a week and made a little presentation, kind of a positive thinking or devotional presentation of 2 or 3 minutes. And it was more encouragement that way rather than building the relationships and being involved in the life of the company. I like the way we're doing it. And so I'm like Joe, I don't see that we would change anything. Someone typed in, do some employees feel investing in a mental wellness program is a waste of resources, and how would you respond to this? I've not had anybody say that to me. Joe, have you had that raised?
No, I think that's pretty seamless to them because, I don't think, I think they know it's for their benefit, and we're certainly not asking them to pay for it in any way. So I've never had any pushback from anyone about it.
I haven't either. And that's why I say when I introduce myself to people that Mr. Street values you. I make it very personal to them. Mr. Street values you so much that he wants to have me available to you and make me available as a support person to you. Someone wrote, how would your work fit into a business that employs unions that are always on the construction job? Well, I'd have to do some research about that one, because I don't know what the union requirements are there. Again, you have to know and learn the culture of the company. So I can't answer that off the cuff without doing some research. But people on the construction job, that's similar to folks that are working out in the shop. And I really stand by my desire and my pledge to not interrupt the flow of work. For that reason, I seldom make rounds at either of the dealerships on Friday or Saturday, because those are such busy times that if I'm up there on a Friday or Saturday, it's usually because somebody has requested it or I'm aware of a special need. So, and if I'm out in the shop with the employees and they're in the midst of tearing an engine apart, I may walk by and catch their attention and say hi and go right on. I do not try to interrupt them. But if they have time, we'll engage in conversation. So learn the culture, find out what a union would require or limit, and go from there. And of course, make yourself available after hours, as I am. These two are related. In your work, Danny, is your work inclusive of differing belief systems? And then another one, how can religious organizations provide and encourage parishioners to use mental health services among its members? So let me speak to the first. And I mentioned that in my presentation, that I do not present myself as a religious person to teach or preach. In the course of conversations, they learned that in my part-time work and semi-retirement that I am involved with the church down in Hereford. And if they ask, and bring up spiritual things, I deal with that. But I don't ask them, I don't put them on the spot. I don't say, what your beliefs, where do you go to church, or do you have a faith group at all? I let them bring that up. So yes, we are inclusive and supportive of anybody. I couldn't tell you, many of the employees, what their faith background is, if any. I'm there to build that relationship and be available. But if they come to me with a problem in a situation, then I may, in that context, in a private conversation, ask them, what kind of support do you have? Family, friends, do you have a spiritual support system? And have you taken advantage of those kinds of support systems? So I'll ask them to evaluate their support. I don't know how we're doing on time.
Danny, there was one more in there, one more question, I think above there. It said, how do you know when to refer out a licensed mental health professional?
Okay, I see that now. Yes, thank you. As I tell people, and as I've told you, I'm not a licensed counselor. I've been involved in church ministry and done a lot of pastoral listening and encouragement over the years. But I try to recognize when people are having struggles that need more than just a listening ear of casual support from week to week. I don't know that I have a template that I can put on that. Obviously, if they're not able to handle their job responsibilities or struggling with drug or alcohol abuse, which they're not supposed to be on the job because of testing. But if they confide in me, then I move quickly to encourage them strongly to get support from professionals or 12-step programs, whatever the situation requires. And I carry some cards and phone numbers of mental health professionals in the community, and I'm free to make those recommendations. I don't follow up and say, did you call the counselor? I leave that in their court.
Hey, Joe, Danny, thanks very much. And fantastic, 5-star. You know, Danny, you made some great comments about and some questions about how a church might, address some of these mental health issues. The reason we thought this was important for Joe and Danny to talk about this is because with the Alliance, we really feel like it's important that businesses begin to identify and educate employees and have resources for them and businesses. And y'all certainly have done that. The second initiative, and Danny, you'll know some of the people involved in this, and Elliot happens to be one, is to go into churches and help them establish a mental health program. So we have targeted 2 churches, First Presbyterian Church and Polk Street Methodist as our 2 targeted churches to establish a mental health program for them to begin to identify and educate parishioners about mental health disease and resources. So you're spot on. I just want to say this, Joe, everybody knows Laura Street, and she was Woman of the Year. So I don't know how Woman of the Year and Man of the Year stay in the same bedroom, but I guess y'all worked that out because that's pretty powerful in itself. Laura was really the founder and the thinker behind the Alliance. And so I wanted to be sure and give Laura a big thank you because it was her vision and her idea to form the Panhandle Behavioral Health Alliance. And so it was actually not her idea to notify Joe Street, which I knew Joe, and before I retired, I taught customer service relations across the state of Texas. Joe didn't know this, but one of his general managers did. I talked about Street Toyota all over the state of Texas because going in for the oil change or just for a part, it is exquisite service. And so I always talk about Joe Street, Volkswagen, and Toyota because of their service excellence. So we do know, and Danny's going to join us tomorrow in our virtual resource lab. And so if you have more questions or want to know more detail about that program, join us tomorrow in the virtual resource session, and Danny can probably get more detail. In that session will be an email for you to contact Danny, and maybe you can drill down to even more questions. So we've known all over the United States and other countries that happy employees, there's a decrease in terminations and turnover, and companies do better financially when they keep a core group of employees that are happy and satisfied and their work productivity is sky high. And I know, Joe, that's happened with you guys.